Hi, it's Rachel Maldonado,
And I'm Lieutenant Colonel Stephen Murray.
and we are talking about the masculinity crisis. Steve, do you think there's a crisis?
Absolutely. It's been brewing for 20 years. I mean, it's if you look back at you referenced Jordan Peterson before we started talking. If you look back 20 years, you'll see that not only did the education system change related to how we raise men and raise boys, but the the culture in our country changed, right? And it started with a lot of the feminist movement back in the 90s, where it wasn't okay anymore to open doors. It wasn't okay anymore to, make decisions for a woman. It wasn't okay anymore to live a Judeo-Christian lifestyle. And it started to progress from there. And now you have terms like toxic masculinity. You have terms that like the patriarchy and nonsense like that essentially what it does is it marginalizes men, right? At the same time all that's going on, the rhetoric changes across the spectrum. They pedestalized women, and they've made guys just go watch a movie, right? You watch any movie out there right now, and I used the Avengers Endgame just as an example during before we started recording, right? You look at another one is look at Captain Marvel. That whole movie is about putting a woman on a pedestal and changing the script, the action hero script and the hero script, to predominantly a woman's script. And in Endgame, it's literally guys are a bunch of bumbling idiots, and the females have to come in and save the day because the guys have ruined everything. It's that kind of subtle messaging that has changed the landscape for men, right? And most guys, especially in their 20s right now, they're inundated with all of these different feminist and just say feminine qualities. Case in point, I had a kid in my car. It's been probably 5-6 years now, right? He didn't want to put his seatbelt on because he's worried about wrinkling his pants. Like, are you serious? Get your man card back, right? You if you're going to put your seatbelt on, you're going to wrinkle your clothes. Come on. But that's just a small microcosm of a bigger problem, right? And the bigger problem is guys are taught from a very young age, right? You can't be a tough guy. You got to be sensitive. You got to be sensitive to other people's feelings. You've got to be, go along to get along. They don't want alphas anymore, right? Because most of the guys that I know that are in their 20s, a good portion of them are betas, right? I know on the conservative side of the house, you'll see guys that are more alpha qualities. And Rich Cooper talks about this on his show on YouTube. He does a show called, I can't think of the name, something entrepreneurs. Oh, Entrepreneurs in Cars is what it is. And he does a weekly half an hour show where all he does is he talks about, what does it mean to be an alpha male? What does it mean to be a beta? What's a beta arbiter? What's a beta cuck? And part of that show is really designed to teach guys, how do you approach women? How do you interact with women? What does it mean when a woman celebrates being with a man? Like, women in this country have forgotten how to celebrate being with a man. They don't have any clue how to be with a guy. And I'm not saying that to be condescending. It's just the whole landscape has changed so much that you can't even have a conversation anymore about anything related to just normal day to day. And I used the example before we started recording that, in most cases, guys aren't taught anymore we used to be protectors, right? Our job was to protect the family, to provide, to go out there and work and bring home the nuclear family concept, right? Where the guy's out earning a wage, the woman's at home raising the kids, and she's the matriarch of the family, and the two come together in a spiritual sense as well as in a partnership, et cetera, et cetera. And each has their role to raise the family and to carry on the family legacy, right? That used to be the model that we followed. Now the model is both of you work, you don't really share any resources, you don't really discuss resources, when you have kids, the woman is supposed to make all the decisions for the kids, and you're supposed to raise the kids in a more aware or socially aware fashion. All of that is just designed to break up the Judeo-Christian nuclear family, right? And I'm not saying that any of those lifestyles is correct over one of the others, but what that change and that shift has done is it's pushed men to the peripherals now, to where they're not embracing their masculinity. They're not embracing, and I'm not talking about, ride a motorcycle, own a gun, or that kind of crap. That's all stereotypes. Being a real man means you sacrifice for your family. You sacrifice for your friends. You go out and you follow the money to provide for your family. You get in somebody's face when they disrespect your wife or your girlfriend or whatever the case may be, and you stand your ground, and literally you stand the ground around whoever you're with, right? Whether that's your wife, your girlfriend, it doesn't matter. We used to have an unwritten rule in this country where you don't disrespect women. You just you don't do it, right? Especially if somebody's with a partner and they're out and about, you don't go disrespect some guy's wife. You just don't do that. Nowadays, it's a common occurrence, right? And people get away with saying some of the most derogatory things, and guys are taught, don't do anything about it. It's just rhetoric. Well, that shift, that subtle shift, has really turned a whole generation into betas. And number one, they don't know when to stand up. They don't know how to speak up for themselves. They don't know how to be assertive. They don't know how to lead. Most of them don't even know how to have any kind of a command presence around anybody, or just have a presence, right? It's terrible. And the worst part about it is to teach somebody like that what it means to be just to be a man is a very hard proposition. Now, the other side of that is the single family homes, right? With the explosion of single family homes, young men especially they're just not around other men enough to really learn what it means to be a man, right? And I was fortunate enough, when we did the Stories podcast, I was fortunate to tell you about a friend of mine. His name was Bob. The guy, he was an amazing guy. He taught me everything, right? How to buy a car, how to manage my money, how to go on a date, what was important about dating, what were the things I needed to do when I was dating, what are you looking for? Now, everything that they do in the millennial side of the house, everything they do literally is done online. They get their validation online, they do their dating, they do their fighting, they do all of their information gathering all online. You don't do anything and make a human connection. And that too, I think, has not only denigrated what it means to be a man, but it's taught a lot of 20-somethings that you don't need to make a human connection. And look at how many of them go from talking via text to sexting to a sexual relationship, and they don't even date. They haven't even literally met in person, and they're already way down the road, right? I was fortunate enough when I was a kid where I had several men in my life that had a very strong moral compass and had a very strong belief system, right? And that they transferred that to me in a variety of ways. Like, one thing Bob taught me unequivocally is the first thing you do as a man is you take care of your family, no matter what that obstacle is. If you can't find work where you're at, go follow the money. Go find a gig, sacrifice for your family, but make sure your family's taken care of. Defend your home, defend your belongings, and, be a good steward in your community, be a part of your community, be a leader in your community, all those things, right? He did all of those things. And he didn't so much tell me these things. He just did it by example, and I was watching him do these things. And as I was watching him with his neighbors, in his community, in his church, I watched him exhibit a value system, exhibit, confidence, exhibit presence, all those things. I just watched him do that, right? And I naturally had some of that from my father. But when my father left the scene, Bob was the guy. And because of all of his examples, I am who I am now, right? And there were others along the way, right? Like, Al Abbott, my first battalion commander, he was amazing guy. And, he took a lot of crap in the Army at that time, but he was an amazing leader because he understood command presence. He understood being out front. He understood setting the example. And at the time, I didn't appreciate all the things he was trying to teach me, but it was 10 years later that it saved my life. And when it did, all of it gelled all at one time, right? And that's what most of this generation is missing. They don't have strong male role models to grab them by the ears and go, yeah, this is what you want to pay attention to. Stop paying attention to this crap. Nobody cares what kind of skinny jeans you have. Nobody gives a shit about how many memes you posted today. Nobody cares about how many pictures you posted today. What have you done to chase excellence? What are you doing to further your career? How have you expanded your knowledge base? And are you a technical expert at something? Do you have a trade? Do you have a skill? And that none of them have gotten that kind of life coaching. So they're floundering in a system that rewards ambiguity and mediocrity. And that's why this whole generation doesn't know what the fuck it means to be a man. They spend their whole time trying to be somebody else and create these personas that don't do anything for them, right? And they don't even know what a man card is. If they did, they wouldn't know what to do with it. And part of it is just, they just need male role models to say, these are the things that are important right now, right? In this phase of life, this is what's important. And I'll give you an example. So both my nephews live with me right now, right? They wanted to get out of Washington. They wanted to do something different. So I said, come on down. And both of them have learned a lot of things from me. One of those things is you be a technical expert at something. It doesn't matter what that is. Go figure out what you're passionate about and go do that and make it a career. Then the money will follow. But the point is you have to be not only skilled at something, but you have to be an expert at whatever your career is. And whatever you decide is your passion, be an expert at that. And the rest everything else will fall in place once you do that, right? And most of us don't have the luxury of working in a business where we get a lot of enjoyment, right? That's just not how our society has worked. But the thing that I've tried to impart on both of them is I enjoy doing security work. I used to really like it. I just left my my last gig this week because I was just tired of the role. But I like the fact that security is a mix between intelligence and let's just say conniving activity. So it's always interesting to see how the enemy is going to try and get into your network, how they're going to social engineer things. And there's never a dull moment, right? And the enemy's adaptive. They know our tactics, they know how we defend things, they know all the tools just as well as we do. And they come up with new and creative ways every day to breach our networks. And that's the exciting part of what I do, right? Is trying to figure out how to patch all these holes and what the new ingenious way of going around our countermeasures are. And it's a never-ending cycle, right? It's in the intelligence business. You're always trying to figure out the enemy's order of battle, what they're doing, what their next initiative is going to be, how they're coming after us. And on the information side of the house, it was always really interesting to see how the Chinese were doing things, the Russians were doing things, different NATO allies would do things related to information, and then trying to fuse all that into a defensive strategy, right? That's just one example of how I've been able to turn something I enjoy into a career. Most kids I would say from 8th grade all the way to 30 right now, they really don't know what they want to do. They don't know what they're passionate about. They're basically inundated with messages saying, don't go chase your passions, just get a job and go to work and be a cog. And some of the most talented people I know are entrepreneurs. They didn't go to college. They didn't go to work. They just went and started a business and figured out what they were interested in solving, a business problem, and then they went out and solved it. And most of them are multimillionaires. And they did it because it was something that they were passionate about doing. They didn't want to work for somebody else. We don't even teach the current generations how to do that. They don't even know how money's made. It's amazing to me. But when you sit and talk to a 20-something, Most of them can't even read an analog clock. They can only read a digital clock. They don't know the square root of shit about a checking account or how the banking system works. So it's not just that they don't have role models. It's not just that they're inundated with social media. It's that they're not taught in school what are the important things in life, or civics, for lack of a better word. They're not taught civics at all. So they're having to go through life and figure all these things out in a digital age where none of that activity for, none of the behavior of being a man is rewarded. It's, in fact, it's scolded. So part of the masculinity crisis, in my mind, is not social. It's social, cultural, intellectual, and ideological. So you have all these different forces acting against all these different kids that are coming through the system right now, and they don't have a chance. They don't even have a chance to be and feel like a man, because the moment they do, they're scolded for toxic masculinity or being a part of the patriarchy. I mean, all those things, those recurring things, they serve to keep men in a beta state. And the way we break out of that, the only way we're going to break out of that, is to restore some of that back in our society. And some of that's religious and some of that's cultural. And I don't know if we can, because now the current speak is, if you're against these certain communities, then you're racist, right? If you don't use pronouns, then you're racist. They've weaponized all of these different feminist agendas against men. So it's going to be very, very hard to raise men as strong, raise strong men, for lack of a better word, until there's some kind of a reset. And I believe that's coming, to be perfectly honest.
Yes.
So
you mentioned competence and individuality. These are important components to masculinity. And you've got the young guys, and I see the young men too. I'm a therapist and I own my life coach. What do you think this has done to the older generation of men? And they're suddenly seeing this change. This is a crisis for them too.
yeah. So this plays out in a number of different ways. So in the younger generations, they're basically being bred to be betas. In the older generations, they're basically being pushed into the peripherals and marginalized, because the stronger the personality, the more resistance they get in normal everyday. And you can see this everywhere you go. Even at a restaurant, if you don't see at a restaurant anymore, you don't see guys talking loudly. You don't see a group of guys hanging out. They're all very quiet. They're very meek. They're in the corner. That's the same has happened with the older generations as well. And where you really don't see any changes in the late 60s to 90s, 100, because you get to a certain point, like me, where you just don't care anymore, right? So those social norms don't resonate. But when you're a 40-something and you're in the middle of your career, every day you go to work, you have to play the part. And more businesses are literally persecuting guys like me, because we're not going to play the game. We're not going to do the whole rah-rah cheerleader thing. We're not going to do the whole pronoun thing and all that other nonsense that they're trying to force down people's throat. But every bit of that is designed to subjugate and to marginalize men. It has nothing to do with respecting somebody's, preferred pronouns or identity or gender identity or any of that other crap. All that crap is designed for one thing only, and that is to marginalize men and pedestalize women. There's no other excuse for it. That this whole nonsense and this conversation around gender is just to divide people, put them into boxes, and get people to fight amongst themselves. Like, think about how many TikTok videos you've seen just in the last year where some dipshit is talking about nobody's respecting my gender and they're not calling me by my gender. Yeah, there's this thing called free will and free speech, and I know you didn't learn that in school because all of your instructors are idiots and all your professors are indoctrinated into communism. But let me help you out. No one has to call you anything. No, you can't pass a law to where I have to respect you. You can't legalize that. You can't You can't make that a criminal offense. You can try, and they're going to try, but it's not going to work out for them. And it's the kicker in all of this is, right, is all these societal norms that have been pushed down over the last 10 years that are dividing our population. Almost every single one of them is really only respected by a very small minority in our society. Everybody else just goes along because they don't want to deal with the blowback. Now, when you equate that back to a 20-something that's coming through the system that's inundated with that every day when they go to school, when they go to church, when they go to a social activity on social media, it's very easy to see why masculinity is being essentially, they're trying to eradicate it. And there's a certain part of every man that's a hunter-gatherer. And feminists go crazy every time you have this conversation, but I'm a hunter, right? I'm a soldier. I'm a warrior. That's what I am. And I've embraced that. Most guys don't embrace what they are. Like, you have guys that are scientists. You have guys that are athletes. You have guys that are like me, that are warriors, right? They've been taught to not respect that. And when you actually start to embrace the personality you are, then guess what? You get self-confidence. You start to do things related to your moral compass. You start to do some things, along your value system and your wants. And guess what? You start to get more self-confidence. The more self-confidence you get, then you get friends that are self-confident. When you get more friends that are self-confident, then you start to do things and you stop worrying about what the rest of society tells you is important. And that's the whole game right there, is they want to tell you what's important. So if my advice to anybody in their 20s right now is go do some real one-on-one time with men, not boys, men, real men. And you'll know who I'm talking about, because they're strong personalities, and they don't back down and tell you that's not important. You can't feel that way. They don't say shit like that. A real man's going to say, rub some dirt in it and move out, and deal with it. Here's some ointment, rub it all over your sore body. Let's go. And, if you're around enough of those guys, you're going to not only take on some of those traits, but you're going to realize that all the societal programming that you deal with every single day is for somebody else. It's not for the average everyday person. It's for all the people they want to brainwash into believing that it's like this conversation where you don't need a gun because we have cops. Well, yeah, you do need a gun because, our society, there's bad people in our society, and they will, come into your house and kill you. That's just how the system works right now, right? So I know I'm talking around a lot of different things, but the short answer is make a human connection. Go hang out with men. Chase excellence. Find something that you like to do and are good at, and go be an expert at that. And then the rest will fall in place. And literally try and find groups of men that are doing things that are not social media. They're not, all of these different programmed events that the current society accepts. Go find things that people used to like to do: hunt, fish, play sports, drive cars, things like that. That's what guys do. And what's funny is I've taken several people flying over the years, and I took this kid. He was his mom was she was what was she? She's a nurse, I think. And he'd never been in an airplane. He never really done anything. And he and his older brother ended up working for me after the first 2 years. But I took them both flying, and I put them behind the controls. And at first they were really, really timid. But then, after a few minutes, they started to figure out that it really wasn't as hard or as dangerous as they thought it was. And then you could see the light click on it, and you could realize that, yeah, I really like doing this. This is something I can do more and more, right? So the funny thing happened, though, is that when we came back and we were sitting in the hangar putting the plane away, both of them started asking me questions about, what I did for a living, all those kind of things. And then 2 years later, they're both working for me, trying to do security work, right? But it wasn't just, I want to do security work. It was, I want to be around people that are experts doing things that I'm interested in. And they figured out through that experience how to go find things they were interested in. And, once they did, one of them now is a full-time radiologist and has a degree in radiology. The other one is a developer that works for a company. I want to say it's up in the Northeast. He's fully remote, and all he does all day is program, and he's an exceptional programmer. He figured out that that was his passion, and he went out and figured out how to do it, and he got around other men that were programmers, that were real men, and they taught him how to be a programmer. And he got over his fragile male ego and his fragile skin, and he was able to take feedback, and he's able to take criticism. And he realized that when he was getting criticism, they weren't attacking him. They were trying to teach him how to do better code. And when he finally put all the pieces together, then everything fell into place for him. And sometimes it just takes one or two of those engagements to shift somebody's life and shift their future. And I would recommend every guy like me to go do that for as many kids as you can, because you never know who you're going to influence. So that's my 2 cents.
You mentioned respect, and of course, respect is earned. It's also admired. And don't you think that the young guys and all the men, that they're craving this, that they want this, that if they knew how great it was, they'd want to be a masculine man?
Well, they have to respect themselves first, right? They're taught not to respect themselves. So they have to respect themselves first and like themselves. Most guys don't even like themselves, right? And it's, again, more of that social programming. But the point is, if you respect yourself, other people will respect you, because all of those pieces will fit together, right? The social contract that you're trying to fill with that is, I respect myself so other people can respect me too. And I'm going to exhibit those characteristics, which will gain people's respect, like being impeccable with your word, following through, being straightforward, being truthful, not having an agenda, having integrity. All of those things matter, right? Because respect is not just you show me respect. It's I have the qualities that people respect, and they will show me respect because those qualities, I'm exuding those qualities, right? And one of this is another Bob story. One of the things about the guy that I loved is he just literally, every pore of his body bled integrity in everything he did. His word, his deed, the way he treated other people bled integrity. And everybody that met the guy instantly trusted and respected him, because every time he talked to you, you knew he was telling you exactly the truth. There was no agenda. There was no BS. It was, this is what I can do. This is what I can. And he was a sales guy, right? He sold engine parts to warehouses, and he was in the supply chain. And I used to watch this guy. I went all over the state with the guy and watched this guy sell to these guys. He'd walk in the door and he'd say, "Hey, what's going on? What are you guys doing? What do you need?" And they'd have a, casual conversation. And then they get to the real business, which is, "Hey, I'm seeing, timing chains that aren't moving, but I'm moving a lot of pistons. How do I, can you do something for me there?" And he'd say, "Well, this is what I can do for you." Right. And lay it out for him. And in almost every instance, even on new clients, every instance, they just go, "Okay, sale done." And it's because he was so knowledgeable about the supply chain and how long things took and where they were coming from and how much it was going to cost and why things weren't moving. He was an expert at the market. He was watching the market. He was watching the parts industry. He was watching the dealerships. He was watching all of that. And he paid attention to it all the time because that was his expertise. And because of that, every time he walked in the door, he was like E.F. Hutton. These guys would stop doing what they were doing and listen to him talk. And he didn't even have to demand respect. He just commanded it because he was such an expert at what he was doing. And he was so honest and he had so much integrity that every time he walked in the door, you can't help but respect the guy because you're getting the straight scoop. And my advice to all these young kids, put down social media, go make human connections, and you'll start to figure out how to earn people's respect. And I'll even go out and say, tell the truth, be impeccable with your word, because it's a quality that we've bred out of children in general,
Mhm.
not just men. How many women do you know that are douchebags that always have an agenda? They can't tell you the truth no matter what. They're not accountable for their behavior. They can't take any ownership for their situation, even though every decision they've ever made led them to right where they are, sitting in your office. But yet they can't, for the life of them, understand why nobody likes them or they can't get along with people. And it's because they have no integrity. And, part of respect means you have integrity. Part of integrity means you tell the truth. Part of telling the truth is not having an agenda. And all of these things roll up to being a real man, because a real man has self-respect. We have a moral compass. We have integrity. We live by ethos, which means we live by a code. We also chase excellence. We're experts at the things that we are passionate about. And then we also treat people with respect, right? Not all of us do it well. Like, I don't do it well at times, right? I have zero patience for people that have an agenda. I have zero patience for that, because, especially in today's society, with so many different things falling apart around us, the last thing I want to deal with is some shitbag who's just out for himself. I don't have time for that, right? And it's one of my limitations. But with everybody else, I'm impeccable with my word. If I say I'm going to do something, I do it, right? And how many times I communicate with you today? Hey, can we push this an hour? I've got this going on, et cetera. I always try to communicate with you so you don't think that, hey, I'm not paying attention. Hey, I'm paying attention. I've got some conflicts here. Can you work with this, right? It's that form of communication that the younger generations are not taught. And they're not taught to live by ethos. Their whole life is wrapped around social media, which is a persona which isn't real. And I live in the real world. And you'll find that when you live in the real world, good things happen. So
Yes.
just saying.
I really love that you brought up telling the truth. And of course, Jordan Peterson, that is one of his mantras, to tell the truth, to take responsibility. And I think that the young guys and all men, they're gravitating toward this. There's benefit to telling the truth, to taking responsibility. You're a real man and you're happier. So
Yeah.
I love that you brought that up.
Yeah. And the other thing too is that you'll find that, and I'll use my current, my last job, right? My boss and I got on the phone and he said, this isn't working. I'm like, you're right. It's not working. This relationship started out well, but my heart's just not in this anymore. I don't like the role. I don't like what I'm doing. I'm not challenged. This is just not a marriage that's going to work. So we should do something else. And so we mutually agreed right there. It's time to go. And I wasn't mad about it. And he wasn't mad about it. It's just the situation, right? And how many guys do you know right now that would be sitting there whining and moaning when they know that the truth is it wasn't working, right? Because the truth is it wasn't working. I wasn't motivated to do my job. And that in and of itself should drive a change.
Yes.
So
Yes, that's a
it's just being
beautiful
honest.
example of
Yeah.
communication. And you mentioned that too, that there's an art to this, and that this is also part of masculinity. Whether you're dealing with women, your family, your work, you got to learn to communicate if you want to be an effective man, a
Yeah.
respected man.
Yeah. Well, just to be a contributing part of society means that you have to take ownership for your side of things. And most guys that are very, very successful, those guys take inventory all the time of their life, the situations, but more importantly, when stuff doesn't go right, they look at what their part of that was. Like, what was my part in this this last gig? And my part was, I didn't communicate that I needed, I wanted more stuff to do, or that I wasn't happy with the position. And the other side of it is I took a lesser position. I was a chief information security officer before I came here, and I took a deputy position knowing that I probably wouldn't be as challenged, but I didn't want to do any of the compliance work, any of the audits, any of the attestation. I just didn't want to deal with that for a while, right? I had too many other things going on in my life that were way more important. But what I didn't do is I didn't anticipate that I would need more things to chew on to stay engaged. And I didn't realize, and I should have taken ownership for this earlier, that I didn't like the culture of where I was working. And part of the cultural shift over the last 2 years drove me out the door. And I didn't look at it from my perspective, and my boss brought it up. And it was one of the things we talked about. He's like, you don't like the culture here. I go, no, I hadn't thought about it, but you're right, I don't. That's part of why I'm so checked out right now. And I could sit and complain about it, but he took enough leadership to bring up the conversation, and then we mutually realized, yeah, this is the right decision. As untimely as it is, like, I don't know what I'm going to do next, and I've got to figure that out. But one thing that I've always feel good about is that I always land on my feet, right? And I put out positive energy, and positive things happen. So the right thing's going to happen probably in the next couple of weeks. It'll be an opportunity I hadn't even thought of. And that's how it goes, right? And part of being back to our conversation of being a real man, part of being a real man is accepting the fact that you made decisions to get you to this point, right? I've accepted I made decisions to get where I am right now. And I made a decision yesterday or Wednesday. I could have said, no, let's figure out how to do this. But I realized it wouldn't have done him any good. It wouldn't have done me any good. And accepting risk in the marketplace right now is just a part of it, right? Because you're making calculated decisions. That's the other part of being a man, is you make calculated decisions for what's best for you and your family, and you just move out. And there's a book that I reference all the time in my sit reps. It's by Lawrence Gonzalez. It's called Deep Survival. And one of the tenets that he talks about that I think all men should embrace is that most true survivors in a deep survival situation, they all have one characteristic that sets them apart from everybody else in society. And that is they're able to rapidly accept the situation they're in, no matter how dire, and then make decisions based on that. And most people in our society don't know how to do that. And if you really want to climb the ladder and be excellent at anything, that's the first step. Accept where you are, accept the situation you're in, and then start making decisions to get out of it. And I think you'll see a change in your life once you start doing that.
I am so intrigued and excited because you mentioned risk. And I think that this is very closely tied to people's fear. And with the masculinity crisis, we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about that fear and that the ability to take risk. So I like that you referenced that too.
Yeah. So again, that's our society, right? Our society is look at COVID. COVID was all about fear. You could die, you could die, you could die. You could give it to other people and die. Other people could die from you giving it to other people, blah, blah, blah. And our whole society was wrapped up in this fear of something that was really just the common cold. And most people never questioned, never even took a second thought to say, okay, how is this going to change my life? How is this going to change the lives of people around me? Instead, it's go along to get along. Our whole society is taught to go along to get along without making any risk-based decisions. Every time you get in your car, you make a risk-based decision. Every time you change lane, you're making a risk-based decision. Every time that you ski behind a boat or get on an airplane, you're making a risk-based decision. But our society has been inundated, and all of it starts I'm going to say all of this starts in schools. Kids are taught to fear everything. They're taught to, fear going out in society alone. They're taught fear of failure. They're taught fear of acceptance, fear of success, fear of just about everything. And most kids live their life in fear. Like the kid that didn't want to put a seatbelt on, he was afraid of being chastised because his clothes were wrinkled. Like, really? But that's our society, right? And one thing about guys that are alphas, they're not afraid to make decisions and fail. Failure is a teacher, and failure can be one of the best teachers that's that you'll ever have, right? Like I've failed plenty of times. I failed at jobs that were way outside of my wheelhouse, that I knew were outside my wheelhouse, and I went and did them anyway because I wanted the experience, and I knew I was going to fail at it, right? But I accepted before I got there, I'm going to fail at this, probably miserably, but I'm not going to, it's not a personal thing. It's just, it's not in my wheelhouse. And in each case, you learn something and you move on. The point of the exercise is to actually take an inventory and learn from it, right? And figure out what you did wrong. Like in my, in my last two gigs, like I did a gig, a short stint, I did about a year at TrueCar, right? And I was the VP of technology, or a VP of information security there. I was the CISO. And one of the things I learned in that gig was they required that I move to Los Angeles, right? I hate Southern California, hate it with a passion, hate it. It's just the culture shitty, the traffic shitty, the people are angry and they're busy. It's just a terrible culture, right? But I did it anyway because I wanted the experience. I wanted to get out of cloud computing. I wanted to do something brick and mortar and deal with an industry that had been around for a long period of time. And when I got there, culturally, I wasn't a fit at all. But I made it work, right? Because I was, I knew security. I knew what the landscape was. I knew one of their biggest customers, and I knew all the pieces and how the pieces need to fit together. It was just the culture that I couldn't adapt to, right? And so about 7 months in, 8 months in, I said to my boss at the time, I said, this isn't working. I think I'm going to be better if I'm remote and I'm not here every day. I'll fly down, be here 2-3 days a week, but then, I'll be offsite. And so that worked for a couple of months. And then finally at 12 months, I sat down and I said, this just isn't working. This culture, I'm not a fit. This isn't a fit for security. You guys don't know what to do with security. And long story short, I learned a lot from it and moved on. And I was with my last employer for almost 3.5 years. And it was a lesser position, but you make those decisions and culmination points in your life, but you're always assessing the risk of that, right? What's the risk I'm going to lose my gig in California and have to move back? What's the cost of that? How much time is that going to take? What should I have in reserves, right? They're all risk-based decisions. And you make those decisions based on what's good for you at the time and what's the next thing you're trying to accomplish, right? And for me, the transition I want to make now is out of security and into being either a chief technology officer or chief information officer and deal with all the technology, not just the security side of the house, right? So that may be a tough transition. And some guys never make that transition. Some guys are stuck in security their whole lives. I don't know. I don't know what the future holds, but I accepted the risk when we had the conversation because I knew he was right. And there's no sense being mad about it. It just is what it is, right? So you just move on. But it was the assessing what the risk would be financially, both to my career, et cetera. And you just make a decision, go. That's all there is to it.
Yes. I think it is so interesting that mistakes are how you learn, and they're essential, and it's okay to take a risk or to fight fear. And that is a huge piece of the masculinity, or just everybody, that you got to try. And you're showcasing that very well. You're always trying. You're always learning. You're always trying.
Yeah, you should be a lifelong learner. You should be. And the other thing to remember is, I worked for a guy, his name is Frank Slootman. He was the CEO at ServiceNow when I started there, and I didn't know who he was. He came out of Data Domain, and he wrote a book called Tape Sucks. And part of his book where he talks about failure, right? His whole mantra to the entire company, which left a lasting impression upon me. And I was in the middle of my career when I was working at ServiceNow. The thing I learned the most is you fail and you move on. You don't dwell on it, right? You fail fast, make decisions, fail fast, then you adjust. And most people are taught that failure is bad. They're taught that if you fail, you've done something catastrophically wrong. That's not true. In some cases, that's true, right? But in most cases, failure is a teacher as much as it's a life lesson, right? So it teaches you what you did wrong. It teaches you where you made bad decisions. It teaches, but you have to be paying attention and listen, right? Case in point, um, when I stood up the operations team for ServiceNow, they had no capability to respond to anything, either related to security or a system failure. So I sat down with the entire group and said, "Hey, I want to write a playbook for the entire group, so everybody's using the same process every time we respond to an outage or an incident or whatever, right? So it's a unified playbook." So I sat down, drafted this playbook, presented it to the whole group. The operations team started using it, and they found a bunch of error, a bunch of kinks in it that didn't work, a bunch of process that didn't work, a bunch of tools that were unnecessary, and things that I thought were going to be important. And the point was, I didn't look at it as failure. I looked at it as an iteration on an initial concept, and then building off of that concept and getting to the sweet spot where everybody had a unified process. Now that process is doctrine at ServiceNow. They've been using that playbook since I wrote it in 2012, and it's still doctrine at ServiceNow. And the amazing part about it is all of their operations teams use it, every single one of them. They've refined it. They've added some different nuances to it, but it's the same playbook that I wrote almost 10 years ago now. And
Yes.
the same thing with the Army CERT. I wrote a process paper there to deal with what's called a brush fire. That's when you have thousands of laptops that are infected with a virus. I wrote a manual on how to handle a brush fire, and it's still doctrine today. And part of that is, again, if you're a subject matter expert in your domain, those things will be easy for you, and you'll be able to think outside the box, right? But there were several failures that led to that finished document. And I know people that would have given up if the first time out of the box it wouldn't have worked. But I knew from experience it was going to take several iterations to get to the place where it actually made sense to everybody and it worked for everybody, right? So that's part of the lesson, is don't get wrapped up in the fact that you failed once or it's rough. It is what it is. Just keep moving forward. Keep plugging away, and the right things will happen. The last piece that I'll say before we wrap this up is, if you're going to go into something, especially in a career, go all in. Don't just dab your foot in the water and I'll try this for a little while and then I'll go do something else. No, go all in. Figure out as much about that as you can. And if you don't like it, great, you can pivot. And I'll give you, for instance, right? So when I left the military, one of the things that drove me crazy, especially as a battalion commander, was everybody's taught how to use a weapon in the military, but you're never really taught all the pieces of it. You're not taught all the aspects of, how do you clear a weapon? How do you replace a barrel? How do you do all these things in the field, right? So when I told myself when I got out, I'm going to go take a gunsmith course somewhere, and I'm going to figure out how all this works, right? It's the same thing with an airplane. When I left the service, I wanted, I'd flown a lot in college. I'd flown a lot in my first few years in the military, but then I had to put it aside because of travel, deployments, et cetera. But I told myself, I'm going to get back to this, and I'm going to learn how to do navigation. I'm going to be an instrument pilot, right? So the first thing I did was I went and refreshed my private pilot, and then I went through the instrument curriculum and got my instrument rating, right? And the same thing with the gunsmith course, right? It's like I found a school that taught it, and I did the 2 years and got the associate's degree. And I did it just because it's something I was interested in. And now I have the choice. I can go do that full time and be a gunsmith and have my own, gunsmith business, which I'm already an FFL, Federal Firearms License dealer, and add that to my, portfolio of service offerings, or I can go do something else. And 90% of it is, I just decided to be a lifelong learner. And that is literally where I'm at now. Now, does that mean I'm good at everything? No, but I can tell you that the things I'm not good at, I spend time trying to be better at them. And it's a lifelong commitment, but I'm all in, right? I was all in for 2 years to figure out how it all worked and figure out how to run a business doing that specialty. And I don't know if it's something I want to do or not, but I know enough about it to know if it's something I want to do or not do. So my two
I
cents.
like that you tie in, get competent at something. The creativity, the mistakes, they all will come together. They help you be a man. And with this masculinity crisis, I know that there are a lot of opposing forces, but I do think that men like you're helping the other men. And so I thank you for that.
Yep. No worries. No worries. I appreciate the time today.
Well, thank you so much, Steve.
Yep. We should do this again soon.
We will.